Everyone knows that American cars failed in Europe, which is very strange because American engineering is famous for being incredibly strong, durable, and ready for any challenge you can imagine. We love our massive engines and wide seats, but in European cities, these same features are exactly what make these cars completely useless and very expensive to own. Why would a car designed for power become totally paralyzed just by driving through a quiet German village at night? I will reveal the secret reason why European police hate the sound of our engines later on. American cars stuck in tiny streets. Imagine you are sitting in your garage somewhere in Texas. You look at your Ford F-150 parked there. It looks like a metal castle, giant and powerful, perfect for carrying everything you need. Now imagine we take that same car, put it on a plane, and drop it in the middle of a street in Italy or France. Do you know what would happen? You would probably get stuck before you even finish turning the first corner. This happens because American cars in European cities are like oil and water. They simply do not mix. But there is a secret detail in the pavement of these cities that destroys any American car, and I will talk more about that in a little bit. In the United States, everything is huge. Our roads are as wide as football fields, and our parking spots look like landing strips for airplanes. But in Europe, the cities were built hundreds of years before the first engine ever existed. Many streets were made to fit only one horse and a carriage. Therefore, when you try to put a giant Cadillac on a street in Rome, it is like trying to fit a size 10 foot into a baby shoe. No matter how hard you push, it is not going to fit. How did this happen? Well, people there prefer cars that look like toys because they are so small, the kind you could even park inside your bedroom. But there is a problem. It is not just the size that gets in the way. If you look at a map of Europe, you will see that the roads are not straight like our highways that cross the Nevada desert. They are full of tight curves that look like a plate of spaghetti. American cars were built to travel in a straight line for hours, as if they were sailing on a calm sea. But when they hit those European curves, they feel heavy and clumsy. But why would they make cars so big if the rest of the world is small? The answer is that in the United States, we love comfort and space, but Europeans need agility so they do not hit the ancient buildings that are only a few inches away from the car mirror. Pay attention to this. The price to keep one of these American giants in Europe is terrifying. Imagine that every time you go to the gas station in England, you have to pay the price of a brand new video game just to fill half the tank. Gas there costs almost 3 times more than what we pay here in Florida or California. It is like the car is drinking $100 bills instead of fuel. Therefore, owning an American car in Europe is not just hard because of the streets, it is a punishment for anyone's wallet. Also, the governments there are very angry about the smoke that comes out of cars. They created laws so strict that many powerful engines we love here are banned from driving in certain European cities. If your car lets out too much smoke, you get a fine that costs more than a vacation trip to Disney. Therefore, American companies tried to sell their cars there, but they hit a wall of rules and taxes. But do not think it is just money and size that explain this failure. There is something much deeper about the way Europeans think about cars, something that even involves the way they look at their neighbors. How do we know this if we never lived there? It is because the data shows they prefer to save every penny for traveling, while we love spending our time taking care of our powerful machines. Therefore, this difference in thinking created a gap that no bridge has been able to cross until today. The secret hidden in the gas nozzle. Imagine you decided to ignore all the warnings and finally bought a huge Chevrolet to drive in Paris. You are feeling like the king of the road, but soon it is time to park. You find a spot, but it is so small it looks like a space for a bicycle. If you try to put your car there, the nose will stick out, blocking all the traffic. It is like trying to put a refrigerator box inside a kitchen cabinet. People start honking, stress levels rise, and you realize your American dream has turned into a French nightmare. Therefore, the simple act of going to the bakery becomes an impossible mission. But there is a technology in Europe's fuel pumps that rejects American cars, and I will talk more about that in a little bit. If you are enjoying this topic, subscribe to see more interesting and different curiosity videos when they are posted. Pay attention to this. Most Europeans do not see a car as a symbol of power like we do here in the United States. To them, a car is just a tool, like a hammer or a screwdriver. They prefer something tiny that uses just a tiny bit of fuel to go a huge distance. Imagine that a common European car can travel from here to the next state using the same amount of gas your truck uses just to drive around the block. But why do they think so differently? It is because space there is as valuable as gold, and spending money on a giant car is seen as something silly or even rude to the environment. But there is a problem. When American brands like Ford or Chrysler tried to change the way they make cars to please Europeans, they ended up losing their identity. They tried to make smaller cars, but they were not as good as the cars from Volkswagen or Fiat, which had been doing it for 100 years. It is like a professional basketball player suddenly trying to become a master of Olympic gymnastics. Therefore, American cars stuck in a strange place. Too big for the streets, but too simple to compete with the luxury of German brands. How did this happen? It was a mix of pride and a lack of planning that cost billions of dollars. Besides size, there is the issue of gears. Here in America, we love the automatic transmission. You just put it in drive and go, right? But in Europe, for a long time, almost everyone preferred the manual transmission, the one where you have to change the gears by hand all the time. They think this gives more control in the mountains and saves more energy. Therefore, when automatic American cars arrived there, Europeans thought they were cars for lazy people or people who did not really know how to drive. It was such a big cultural shock that it felt like they were speaking different languages. Driving an American car in Europe also means paying taxes that never end. In countries like Norway or the Netherlands, the government charges extra fees just because your car is heavy. Imagine you buy a car for $30,000, but the government forces you to pay another $30,000 just in import and pollution fees. In the end, the car costs the price of a Ferrari, but it is still just a Ford. Therefore, people look at the price and run to the local stores. But even with all of this against them, there is a specific part in the engine that Europeans hate in cars from the United States. How does it work being that way? It is a part made for our flat roads that simply melts when it tries to climb the Swiss Alps. Therefore, American mechanics, which are strong as a bull here, end up getting sick when they breathe the air of Europe. The part that melts in the frozen mountains. Imagine you are driving your powerful car on a road that climbs a mountain so high you can touch the clouds. In the United States, we have the Rocky Mountains, but the roads there are made to be smooth and gradual. Now imagine the Alps in Europe, where the roads look like steps on a spiral staircase, climbing in a steep and dangerous way. The American engine was made to be a flatland marathon runner, but on these mountains, it needs to act like an elite climber. This is where the trouble starts. But there is a detail about the sound of these cars that makes Europeans call the police, and I will talk more about that in a little bit. Pay attention to this. The brakes on American cars were not designed for the never-ending downhill slopes of Europe. Imagine you are driving down a hill for 20 minutes without stopping. If you use the brakes of a car made for the flat streets of Miami, the metal will get so hot that it can literally start to glow like a barbecue coal. When brakes get that hot, they stop working. Therefore, what was supposed to be a vacation trip turns into a horror movie where you cannot stop the car. But why don't they just change the brakes? Because changing that would cost so much money that it would be cheaper to build a brand new car from scratch. But there is a problem. There is a difference in taste that is almost impossible to explain with numbers. Americans love the sound of a V8 engine, that deep rumble that makes the ground shake like a small earthquake. To us, that is music. But in Europe, silence is sacred. Many cities have laws that ban loud cars from driving at night. If you start your Mustang early in the morning in a quiet village in Germany, your neighbors won't think it is cool. They will think you are a cartoon villain ruining their breakfast. Therefore, what we see as power, they see as noise pollution. How did this happen? It is a difference in culture that goes back to the time when they used quiet carriages and we used wild horses. Besides the noise, Europeans are obsessed with the car's interior. They want the dashboard to look like a Swiss watch, made of expensive materials and with a perfect finish. Many American cars use plastics that are great and durable, but to a European, they look cheap, as if they were made of the same material as a child's toy. Therefore, they get into the car, touch the dashboard, and feel that it is not worth the price they are paying. How do we know this if we have never been there? Satisfaction surveys show that the biggest reason for complaints is not the engine, but the feel of the buttons and the quality of the seats. In the end, the failure of American cars in Europe is like a cake recipe that went wrong. You have the best ingredients, but they don't work together. The car is powerful, but the street is tiny. The engine is amazing, but the gas is expensive. The design is beautiful, but the neighbor thinks it's too loud. Therefore, American companies like Chevrolet and Cadillac have given up on almost the entire continent. They realized it is better to be the king in your own backyard than to be a stranger in a land that doesn't want you. How does it work being that way? The truth is that the world has become small, but cultures remain giant and very different. A car is not just metal and wheels, it is a reflection of who we are. And it seems, Americans and Europeans are still driving in completely opposite directions.